My name is Will Swaim. I'm president of the California Policy Center. You can find the center at californiapolicycenter.org. I also host I co-host a podcast for National Review called Radio Free California, and you can find that wherever fine podcasts are given away. As the name suggests, we talk about California politics. I do the history portion as well, which usually involves somebody like John Sutter or Spanish explorers or Native Americans. So the way this is going to go down tonight is probably a lot more philosophical than many people might prefer. But at the CPC, what we're really interested in for years has been to eradicate insider dealing, which some people call cronyism, call it what you will. We're a very free market sort of organization, and we think that the more freedom we have as individuals, the more vibrant our society. People on the panel, I think Dr. Moreno will likely disagree with some of this, but maybe not all of it. He may surprise me. But we wanted a variety of voices here. And so we'll talk about that, but we are going to start with the conversation about Anaheim. And to do that, I just want to kind of set the table, if you will. Hey, Scott, good to see you, man. I wanted to sort of set the table by recapping for those who haven't been following the game as closely as others. So I'm going to have to refer to my notes here. But I remember where I was, before all this broke out. This is in early May, and all of a sudden I'm watching the Anaheim Stadium deal go through, and then all of a sudden there's this weird hiccup, and I didn't get the story completely chronologically at first. A judge threw out put a pause on the court hearing to sell Angel Stadium or Anaheim Stadium to the Angels to an Angel-associated development team. And I thought, well, what the heck happened there? So you start to read, and why did the judge postpone this thing? Well, because it looked like there was an FBI investigation. This is very exciting. We have some journalists in the room. Please raise your hands. Where are you? All right, look at all the journalists. Awesome. So you guys know what I know, which is you mention FBI investigation, wiretap, Disney, Angels. Hoorah! We're ready to go. This is a great story. I need 3 quotes and a 2 o'clock deadline, and I've got a story. What I want to suggest is that this kind of corruption goes on, hey TJ, this kind of corruption goes on all over the state almost all the time, right? And I'm talking specifically about corruption and bribery as opposed to cronyism. And we're here really to talk about the latter rather than a lot on the former. The former is far more sexy. The latter can become, as I suggested, a little bit philosophical. So I'll ease you into that by doing what any good journalist would do, and we'll just go over the highlights of the horror show. So in early May, Anaheim officials are working with the Attorney General, Rob Bonta, up in Sacramento, to kind of close the gap on a problem they had with state law and housing development associated with the sale of the Anaheim Stadium. And any of these gentlemen, please, especially you two here, correct me if I get the facts wrong, and you can just jump right in, but do speak into the microphone so that we can record this and then present it to the FBI. This microphone, this one here, it goes right to an FBI agent. Yeah, okay. So the speed with which the sale was moving through was explained, at least, or alleged by the FBI to have something to do with Mayor Harry Sadu's deep desire to work a deal, to make sure that there was a big cash payout. The Angels got their stadium, and then maybe there would be something. We'll get to this. It is alleged that there was a quid pro quo here. Now, here's what smart politicians do. They wink, wink, nudge, nudge, do a thing for somebody, right? And they don't ask for a thing in return. That's impolite. It's also illegal. So what you do instead is it's understood. This is how cronyism works. I scratch your back, and I do not ask you to scratch mine. You just do it, right? No quid pro quo, there's no ask. But in Anaheim, the FBI alleges there was an out-and-out quid pro quo. We'll come to that. The price tag on this deal, by the way, was $320 million for the stadium. Those of us who are old enough to remember when the stadium was sold to Disney back in the day, what was the price tag then for the stadium, anybody? How much was it? Gentlemen, how much was this? Didn't the stadium, 90s or so? Yeah. $1 was the price I remember? Was that 80s? Oh my gosh.
96 was it?
Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. Oh.
Yeah, so I know a lot about those old deals. 96, I was on the council. I voted against that deal. It's a terrible deal. It sold it to Disney for extremely cheap. The only thing the city got was the name Anaheim Angels, and Disney took over the maintenance of the stadium, and we get a few dollars every year. And over the years, I think Dr. Moreno, you just found out that it was over all those years break even. So the city got nothing for it, but we got the name, which is no longer the name, and the maintenance. 2013, it was the council majority voted 4-1 to give it away for $1 a year for 6 years, and I was able to stop that and fight that. Latest one, Dr. Moreno's been on the front lines on that, fighting that, and Denise Barnes, who was on the city council also at the time. So anyway, I could go on for a long time.
And poor Tom. Oh, I'm sorry.
But the stadium was never sold. It's always remained property of the public. It was leased, correct? So what was the transaction between Gene Autry and Disney for the team? No, transaction for the team, not for the stadium itself.
Thank you. Okay. So on Monday, May 16th, the FBI releases it's like, shall we call it a dossier, affidavits, it's documents on the case, in which they describe a shadowy network. Everybody shout it with me like it's Groucho Marx. What is it? What's the magic word here, please? Cabal. There you go. In which they describe a shadowy network of public officials and business figures the Bureau says have been running the city of Anaheim for personal and political gain. I want to quote from Norberto Santana of the aforementioned Voice of OC. Here's the opening for his story on that release. Bribery, wire fraud, false statements, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. That's how federal agents publicly characterize the efforts of Anaheim Mayor Harry Sadu, the city's main negotiator with the L.A. Angels. Oh, Norberto. In the bid to quickly sell off the public stadium and 150 acres of land around it in recent years to a development team led by Angels team owner Artie Moreno. So the feds allege that Sadu wanted to help the Angels close the stadium quickly, the deal quickly, so that he could so he was passing along confidential information. The reporter in me, every reporter right now is bristling with anxiety because I'm out here on a tightrope. I must say, all of these are allegations in the documents. Nothing regarding Harry or a lot of the other people we'll be discussing tonight has been, there are no formal charges yet for those guys. Just one guy has been charged. We'll come to him in a moment. He pled guilty. We can talk more freely about him. But let's be really clear, when we're talking about bribery here, we do not want to say these people engaged in bribery with any certainty. We can tell you what's in the court documents. Make sense? Okay. So, and Harry denies that there was any of this kind of backroom dealing going on. But the FBI bases its claim on a recorded phone conversation in which he told a Chamber of Commerce official he hoped the Angels would contribute, quote, at least $1 million. He said at least $1 million to his reelection campaign. The Bureau alleges that Todd Ament, that's the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce in Anaheim, had accepted cash payments in exchange for a promise to make things happen at City Hall. He has pled guilty, but strangely only, think of Al Capone, to charges of lying about his assets in the purchase of a vacation home in Big Bear Lake. So far, so good, guys? Okay. I'm sorry that I'm showing you my, what have you. So the scandal really quickly metastasized. We had a couple of other people. The documents indicated that an unnamed consultant, who many people think is a guy named Jeff Flint. This is out there in the press. This is what people are reporting, that he's a Republican consultant, that he may have been involved. He took a leave of absence from his company. Just like Harry Sadu, he denies any wrongdoing. And I'm not saying that the discount is, he has a Fifth Amendment right? He's got to be able to say that he didn't do it if he didn't do it. And then the other one was Melahat Rafiai, and I think that's how you pronounce her last name. Anybody want to correct me there? Close enough, thank you. She is a longtime leader of the Orange County Democratic Party and the state party, and was recently appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to the Fair Board here in Orange County. She was involved in the investigation, and somebody here may know more precisely what involved means. I don't want to speculate much, but she was involved in the investigation. There's some suggestion that maybe she was a witness, and then, maybe she was more than that. She might be a target of the investigation. She also denies any wrongdoing, but she stepped down from her Democratic Party affiliated jobs. And likewise, said, didn't do anything wrong. So the only person who seems to have been really shocked by what happened in Anaheim is Attorney General Rob Bonta, who was watching this deal move through. This is just me talking about Rob Bonta, who I find just execrable, and I'm sorry to my friends who are Democrats and love the guy, but he was involved in this deal that was, we now know kind of problematic, and all he was concerned about was imposing a state housing law on this thing. So anyway, the bribery alleged in the FBI documents is not the same thing as cronyism. That's what I was saying earlier. Bribery is against the law. Right? Somebody want to define bribery for me? We got any lawyers in the room who handle criminal defense, political criminal defense specifically? Somebody here knows what bribery is. Come on, we all know what that is. Tim Shaw, talk to us about bribery. Go to the expert, am I right?
That's very good. I would maybe try to say, in exchange for giving me money, I will do something in my government role for you.
Perfect, yeah. Okay, well done. Love it. Give the man a $500 unmarked in a gym bag. So, bribery is when a person in a position of trust, and that can even be inside a company, mind you, but typically in the context we're talking about, it's political. When a person in a position of trust with some access to gifts, in this case the public treasury, when that person, as a quid pro quo, that's my car ride, sorry. So in exchange for a consideration, that person uses their political power to give you a gift, right? Like maybe a stadium, okay? So that's bribery, that's bad. As I mentioned earlier, there are bribery cases going on right now all over California that are just far less sexy. No angels, no Disney, no nothing like that. If you drive up the 710 freeway, a lot of the cities in sort of that southeastern part of LA, they call that, anybody know what they call that part of for political junkies? Looking at you, Scott, TJ. The 710 freeway is called the corruption corridor. That's where the city of Bell blew up. You remember Bell, for those of us old enough? For some of you, that's 12 years ago. It's when you were, still in your mommy's lap or whatever. But Bell blew up after an LA Times investigation revealed that these politicians and the city council and the city manager had used their positions to give themselves, city council members, school board members who are in here, think about this, they'd given themselves massive six-figure salaries. My memory is they were like in the neighborhood of $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 for a part-time job. Cars, stuff. It was amazing. And Bell it's a working class city. There's an investigation going on, I think, right now in Vernon, City of Industry. I'm missing one. There's one other. Pardon? Huntington Park, is that right? Okay. I'm going to take your word for that. Now I'm going to quote it and say it's real. Huntington Park, definitely. LA, anybody following the big bribery scandal up in LA? Anybody? City council member was going around to developers, and in exchange for hundreds of thousands of dollars, he was offering developers a kind of a secret fast pass into getting project approvals. And what he was really doing was taking some of that money and paying off people in the planning department to approve things before they had ever been really kind of looked at. That's a Disney fast pass right there. So that trial's going on, and it involves this city council member, these developers, these people inside City Hall who use their positions to grease the skids for massive developers who would deliver the money. In one case, it was a Chinese gentleman who would give the money to the council member in lucky red envelopes, if you've ever seen those, right? Lucky red. So now cronyism this is what we're here to talk about really with our panel. We're here to talk about cronyism. And again, I want to distinguish that from bribery. I think I've made it clear, the difference. I'm not going to flog a dead horse here. But the fact is that cronyism is going on all over the place. And I'm going to define cronyism the way I want to, because as Ronald Reagan once said, I own the mic. And what I'm doing with that mic, Tom Tait can now tell you, is making it sweaty. I am so hot and nervous. Sorry, Tom. Everybody's going to want to go like this. So Cronyism is different. It is when the government steps in and tries to run economic development projects, and frequently does so for the benefit of incumbent players or powerful political interests. What I think has been missing from the pretty good coverage of what's going on in Anaheim, no mention of the role of government unions. And I bring this in because California Policy Center's main focus is the problem of government unions and the obstacles they pose to any kind of reform. I'm particularly interested and would like to talk to Dr. Moreno about this, and Tom in a little bit, Tom Tait. But my own sense is, I think John Moorlach has experienced this firsthand, perhaps. But government unions are massive and powerful in California. California has 12% of the nation's population. We have 25% of its government union members, state and local government workers. We're disproportionately represented. Behind us, way behind us, are New York and Illinois. Way behind us, not even close. And they are marginal in terms of the numbers they have, but they're still very significant players. In California, government unions generate through dues about $900 million per year. $900 million. Think about that when you're running for office or you're walking for a candidate and you're trying to scratch together $20,000, $30,000 for a political campaign, and a union decides they've taken an interest in you. My friend Ceci Iglesias is not in here, but I would just point out that Ceci was on the city council in Santa Ana when she voted no on a pay increase for the police union, and also insisted that maybe they should start to pump the brakes and take a look at some allegations of excessive force and these massive payouts to victims of police abuse. For that sin, the union mounted a recall campaign during COVID. Don't know if you saw this, and they took her out. They recalled her during COVID. Did they do this because her vote tipped the balance? They didn't get what they want? No, they won. They got what they wanted. They did this drive-by because they could. That's why they did it. To show everybody, to put a horse head in somebody's bed. That's why they did it. So unions are super powerful. And anybody who's in government around here knows exactly what I'm talking about. And that's a crony problem as well. And by that I mean these are people, the unions elect candidates who once in office turn around and without ever having been asked for it, do favors for or are just sympathetic politically, philosophically to the unions, right? Same thing happens, and the left doesn't tend to recognize that as a problem. Both sides frequently have a problem with recognizing corporate welfare, right? If you're a conservative, here's my take. If you're a conservative and I ask you, are you pro-business? And you say yes, and I ask my follow-up question, which business? If you can answer with the name of a company, you're not really for the free market. You're for that company. Right? That's not free market. That's not pro-business. That's for that company. That's a problem. So I want to, sort of Oxford Union debate style, I want to make a proposition here, and that is the real problem in Anaheim, underlying bribery, which is criminal, was the city's slow slide toward really bringing in the kinds of actions, activities, behavior patterns, culture that had people in the city council thinking, you know what, I may not run a business, but I can run businesses, right? And you get people who are just like me, just like you. Now, some of you are undoubtedly smarter and better business people than I am, but none of us is in a position to really understand how the entire economy works. And I would argue that what happens in these cities is that the economy gets unbalanced. The unions begin to drive up the cost of doing business. You have unfunded pension liabilities, for instance. You have rising pay and discounted reform. And then in the end, you've got financial catastrophe, which John Moorlach is here to talk to us about. Okay, so I think that's more or less, I've got pages more to go through, but I'm going to spare you all. That's an applause line. Am I right? Okay, thank you. Yes, sparing you all. Okay. So I think we're at the point in the show here when we really want to talk about, and I have to look for my notes. Sorry, man. I used to have a run list here. Here we go. Okay, so that's our retelling of the Anaheim story, sort of setting the stage here for our conversation with our panelists with us. And I'm going to do this from memory. Every one of these kind people sent me really great biographies. And if I read them, we would take us to about 10 o'clock tonight. They are really accomplished people. I'm going to start by, I'm just going to introduce people and then just ask them if they would to, take, you know what I'll do? I'm going to hand John Moorlach the mic. John, I would like you to introduce yourself, except for allowing me to say that we've been friends since Ronald Reagan's second term. And when I was a commie, right? Big time commie, yeah. So, John, if you would please, you go ahead and introduce yourself, quick introductions, and then hand it over to Dr. Moreno.
Well, Will, you were telling such a good story. I was getting comfortable and hoping you would give me a pillow. John Moorlach. Will and I became acquainted when the publisher of the editor of the Daily Pilot, Lisa Robinson, is here. She used to work for the Daily Pilot. Bill Lobdell had a cable show, and he said, sometimes, I've got two conservatives, I got two liberals. They didn't tell me one of them was a communist. And sometimes the two conservatives can't make it. And they were, unknown names, Joe Ellen Allen, now Joe Ellen Chatham, and some guy named Hugh Hewitt. And and so I would replace them, and I'd have this incredible half-hour debate with Will and Mark Petrarca, and I'd be up all night. Oh, I should have said this, and oh, I should have said that, and that kind of started, my public life. Literally, it was shortly after that I ran for Orange County treasurer and did that for 12 years, and then I got upset about the supervisors voting for pension increases.
Say one thing about 1994, please. There's a little event that happened in 1994 that you were involved in.
Oh, thank you, Vern, for the help there. I just kind of said, if my my uncle Alan Greenspan keeps raising interest rates, that it would be a disaster for the strategy that the incumbent treasurer tax collector was using, and we would call it in the investment world, we would call it the carry trade, where you borrow at a low rate and then invest at something that's paying a higher rate. But when the short end of the curve goes up, which is starting to happen again, then you will be paying more in interest in your borrowings than you are making on the 4-year bonds or whatever long-term holdings you purchased. So we call that an alligator or an implosion. And so it was interesting last month to see headlines. Fed raises interest rate by 75 basis points. Has not happened in 28 years. But when it happened 28 years ago, it totally changed my life. I had run against Mr. Citron. I lost in June. And by November, Alan Greenspan raised rates 75 basis points. And now, and Mr. Citron was now paying more than he was earning, called a meeting. And then the supervisors called in bankruptcy attorneys. And what do bankruptcy attorneys encourage you to do? And that was declared bankruptcy. So I had predicted, I kind of said this was going to happen. And so I predicted the largest municipal Chapter 9 bankruptcy in U.S. history at that time. Birmingham, Alabama, Jefferson County bumped us into second place. I wasn't happy about it. I made a crack about it, made it to their local paper. Treasurer of Orange County, not happy to be in second place. But and then the city of Detroit put us in third place. But we held the title for 17 years. Not too bad.
Can I summarize the rest?
And then after that, I got mad at the supervisors, ran for supervisor, and then did that for 8 years. And then I ran for Senate because friends said, hey, like Tom Tait one day said, you need to run for state Senate. And it was Tom, was one of the key people that influenced me. It's not like I had a plan. Everything's been serendipity and interesting and fun. But
I want you to think like a hip hop artist and talk right into the mic, yo.
The reason I called Alan Greenspan my uncle is because I had a reporter call me and during the campaign from the bond buyer, and he said, "How do you know? How do you know which way interest rates are going?" And he was really arrogant. And I said, well, that's easy. My uncle is Alan Greenspan. And I could hear his pencil drop. I mean, it was like, he stops, he says, I hadn't read that anywhere. And I said, he's not my uncle. If I knew which way interest rates were going, I'd be the wealthiest man on the planet. So, you know, come on, wake up. But if these rates go up, it's going to be a mess.
So, John, when you were in the state Senate, you were the only CPA in this, I think, in the State House. Is that right?
Of the 120 legislators, correct.
Yes. Okay. So this is important to remember when you think about why government doesn't always work. One CPA in a state that is the largest state in the nation with the world's 5th largest economy. One guy who really knows math. Okay. Dr. Moreno, please.
Good afternoon. When I started this, Tom Tait's laughing at me already. I think he's so many times that we were in forums in spaces that where I think we think about Governor Newsom in different ways. I'll say, but I'll introduce myself this way. My family migrated to the United States when I was 4 years old, on the promise that we were going to go to Disneyland, and we did, ironically, right? And we didn't make it till I was 13 because we were too poor to go. And we were only able to go because family was coming and my parents had to look like we were making a good living. So they saved a lot of money and we were able to go to Disneyland. So I grew up in Oxnard, California, and by the mighty stroke of a pen of Ronald Reagan, championed by Alan Simpson, I became naturalized, legalized in this country. And went on to a pathway to citizenship that allowed me to pursue my studies along with my sister, who is an obstetrician gynecologist in Arizona, and my brother, who is a physician in Kaiser, Sacramento, and then myself, currently a professor at Cal State Long Beach in Chicano and Latino Studies and Policy Studies. Went to UC Irvine as an undergrad. That's how I got acquainted with the going beyond the red curtain, as we used to call it in Ventura County, which ironically is the other side of the red curtain, as it turns out. But as a kid, you don't see those things. You just want to figure out how to do right in the world. So we came to UC Irvine following my brother and my sister, and that's when I became acquainted with Orange County and the deep inequalities that so many folks encounter, and got engaged in community work, education work in Santana and Anaheim as an undergraduate, encouraging young people to go to college, go to school, working with families on the system, how to learn the system. And then from there went on to Harvard Graduate School of Education to get my master's and my doctorate. All of it made possible by the stroke of a pen that said, you are somebody. As President Reagan said, let's pull them out of the shadows so they can live as people. And I had the pleasure, I'll just finish with this, I had the pleasure to meet Senator Simpson at the Harvard Graduate Kennedy School. And he gave a talk and it was packed. And my wife and my person to be my wife, who I met there, Lorena, had the same story, was also undocumented, was also able to get her residency and citizenship through IRCA of 1986. We both approached Senator Simpson during the reception. Everybody in the world wanted to meet him. And we just said, Senator Simpson, we're your children. And he kind of looks, turns red, and kind of says, looking for security. I said, no, we are the children of IRCA, of the bill that you championed, and we know you got death threats. We know you were just thrown a lot at you, along with other folks who came across the aisle to work together. So we thank you for that. We're only here at Harvard because of you. And he just started crying. He started crying, and he started telling us the stories of what it was like to reach across the aisle to pursue a law that would humanize millions of people in the United States. Who were themselves recruited, or as my family did, came because my mother would have not survived breast cancer if we had not come to the United States at the urging of her doctors, and whose doctor said, you should stay here if you want to survive. So as a result of that, I'm grateful to be here and to share the story of Anaheim and how we have to work together if we're going to really make government work for the people. So thank you.
I just want to say, yeah, great story, inspiring. There were two things that really struck me. A man who is told that you are his child, and then he cries. That makes total sense to me. Not you personally. Sorry, I didn't mean it that way. That didn't come out right. Tom, please.
See, I got involved actually in Anaheim back in 1994. I got appointed to the city council. There's a vacancy following that bankruptcy. So the election in November of '94, Tom Daly was a council member, ran for mayor, won, and now there's 2-2, the mayor and 3 council members. But there's a 2-2 split on the council as moving towards a special election. And then the Orange County bankruptcy hit, and Anaheim was the largest investor in that fund. And the press got interested in saying it's going to cost $200,000 on top of all that for a special election, and the council had the ability to appoint somebody. So it was because of that bankruptcy that I got appointed, and it was and everyone was, there's a 2-2 split, so it was kind of going back and forth, and I got 1 vote from each side. And next meeting, I got a call from the LA Times. I was at home saying, "You just got appointed to the Anaheim City Council," and Disney just canceled their Westcott project, and the Rams just left, and the Angels are threatening to leave, and you're the swing vote. What are you going to do? And I had if there's such thing as a deer in headlights look over the phone, I had it. And so that's how it started. I thought I'd do it for a couple of years. Once I got involved, I actually learned to love the city, and I ran for re-election twice with help of Matt Holder and John Lewis and a bunch of other friends and a bunch of other friends I see here. And so then as it turned out, and I thought I was finished. And then 6 years later, the mayor's seat opened up with Kurt Pringle termed out. And I had this idea about kindness, about changing the culture. And maybe I can talk about that a little bit later. And so I ran for 10 years. 2010 to 2018, that's turned out, and now I've got the title of former mayor, and I really like that.
Well done.
Well, good evening. Thanks for having me. I feel very blessed to be up here with these 3 men. They're very accomplished and have done amazing things. I think why I was asked to be up here.
You're Dwight Robinson.
Yes, exactly. I'm Dwight Robinson, former councilman and mayor in Lake Forest. And the reason why I think I was brought up here was just to talk about the smaller cities in Orange County and exactly what Will mentioned earlier, which was there's cronyism everywhere. It's rampant. It's in all of our cities. It's not just the salacious stuff that ends up on the front page of the Register and that we all hear about on the news. There's issues that are popping up every single day. So I hope to share a little bit about some of my experiences with that, both in city government as well as I represented Orange County on the AQMD board for 4 years. Very big budget, a lot of cronyistic things happening there on a very regular basis, and then also spent a few years on the Fire Authority board working with the unions and the pension issues and things like that. So professionally, I own a few companies in the logistics sector, which has become a very popular one over the last couple of years. I operate my businesses in the city of LA, so I know what it's like to do business in LA and all the hoops you have to jump through and the contributions you need to make so that you can get a meeting with a councilman or city staff or port staff. So be happy to share some of those experiences. And again, just feel very honored to be up here with these gentlemen.
Can't wait to get to that. Thank you. So let's start with Anaheim. I really do want to get to what Dwight is talking about here, you know, being able to compare and contrast. But let's start with Anaheim if we can. Tom, I want to start with you and say, so some of the activities that are uncovered in the FBI thing are, you know, particularly, they're criminal, right? That's what we're looking at there. But long before that, there was this culture of city officials doing everything they can to kind of, you know, twist knobs, pull levers, and get the economy organized the way a particular city council would like. And so pardon me for being really blunt here, but Tom and I are friends. Dr. Moreno and I are now friends. So Tom, you were for some of these things before you were against them. It's the way it looks to an outsider in the mid-90s. There was the resort district. We saw loads of small family operated hotels right across from the park that were, let's say, politely eliminated. Even if the families were compensated, these businesses were moved away. Disneyland was given this massive resort project. There may be great reasons behind that, and I guess the argument in favor of cronyism is always, this is how we're going to make more money, right, for the city. This is what we're going to do. And cronyism doesn't ever suggest that there's ill intention. But I do want to say there was that, and then in, I can't remember, 2001 or 2, you voted for a government union package, and I'll ask John to sort of jump in on that in a moment. But that was for public safety officers. It was the retire at 50 with 3%. They call it 3 at 50 or 3% at 50. That dramatically lowers the age of retirement for public safety officers and dramatically increases their pension income. My favorite fireman is a good friend of mine who shows up every 2 years with a brand new sports car and has 4 homes because he went on to another career. Retired at 50. Most dangerous thing he ever had in Anaheim was a boa constrictor. That's the thing that he always tells people. Not the fire, it's the snakes. So you voted for these things, and tell me if I'm on target, or you had a change of heart, or I just don't understand what you were up to at that time.
Well, thank you, Will, for those softball questions leading in. Yeah, I voted for some of that stuff, and I like to think I learned the last 20 years. But I remember I mentioned when I first got appointed back in almost my first meeting. City council. There's an item, Fry's Electronics. I remember Fry's, and it was and you had on the agenda was to give Fry's $5 million for tenant improvements. I thought, wow, and basically refunding their half of their taxes that they're going to pay to Fry's, but it couldn't be a refund because you can't do that legally, and they did it through tenant improvements and all this stuff. And I thought, wow, how would I think it was called Computer City or something that was had already gone out of business. And I thought, well, Circuit City. I go, how would they feel about that? And I thought, well, maybe they got one of these deals. And then I thought, well, how about somewhere in Anaheim, there's a mom and pop electronics store that probably been there for 25 years and probably involved in the Kiwanis Club and all these civic organizations and giving back. And they probably got blown out when Circuit City came through before. But how would they feel if Fry's, who doesn't need any help, gets a big competitive advantage? So anyway, I voted against that. And I remember it was a 4-1 vote. That was one of my first votes. So then there's, you mentioned the Disney, then I voted against Angel Stadium. That came up right away. It was a crappy deal back then. I kind of explained it earlier. It was a 3-2 vote, and we lost that. And that was against Disney and the Angels. And it was very difficult. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, let me put it that way. There's a lot of pressure because all the money's on the other side. And so there was next was the big bond issuance where the city issued a bond. There wasn't, I don't believe there's any eminent domain taking for that, because that is a principle I would never cross knowingly. But there was but they had the votes, and that was one of those things when you're in office, like, what do I do? So I was able to negotiate some things that were helpful, and they got a unanimous vote. It's kind of getting in the weeds, but I got Disney to guarantee those bond payments because we're coming off of bankruptcy, and I know things don't always work out the way people do or think they might. So I got Disney to guarantee the bond payments, and I thought that was a win. And also Disney wanted a lifetime or forever exemption from any taxation. And I was able to negotiate that down to 20 years. It's funny, it came up, and I'm still around, it was around 20 years later when it came up. So I had to kind of hold my nose on that one. And there's a lot of good that, there's a lot of, the city redeveloped that whole area, but there was a lot of things that weren't good about that deal. 2001, there's a $7 million subsidy to a hotelier. This is following 9/11. Everything collapsed, and I was convinced that they needed this money to stay afloat, and I voted for it. I wish I hadn't. It was a mistake. And because why did that person get it and not all those other hoteliers? But that was, and then the pensions. Yeah, man, this is tough for me going through all these. But yeah, it kind of is. I'm going to ask for it. I got a bunch of good votes in there too. I want to talk about those maybe. Thanks for starting with these, Will, and all of them too. But there was so the pensions. There's a management pension 2.7% at 55. I voted against that. And then there was the fire department had their 3% at 50, but they had already passed, the people got an initiative passed in the city of Anaheim that said the city would have to pay by arbitrator whatever the going rate was. And they had already passed, so they were going to get that anyway by an arbitration. The police one came up, and I voted for it, and I shouldn't have. But I did put in a provision that said if it ever goes above a certain level, then the employees would pay all that difference. And so it protected the city on the downside. A couple years later, they went above that level, and the police union said we want that removed, and the city council removed it as a 4-1 vote. And I meant to keep it, but we had that protection. I put that in there.
Where were you on
I was against that.
You were the one.
I was the one. So that would have protected the city on the police contract, but the council majority and the mayor at the time voted to do it. So anyway, there's some caveats in there. I made some mistakes. It is kind of like Catholic confession, but I learned a lot in that. And when this Angel Stadium deal came around in 2013, that deal was terrible. Largest city asset. And the city council voted on an MOU. That means 30 days later it'd be the final contract, but they voted on MOU to give it away for $1 a year. And take away the name Anaheim. But $1 a year, a billion, maybe $2 billion asset. Anyway, I was able to, just through using the bully pulpit, because the city council tried to limit my ability to put it on the agenda, and using the bully pulpit, talking to the community. There's a group of people here that some people call them gadflies. I tell you, a tremendous amount of credit. Stand up, you all, because Cynthia Ward and Mark Daniels and Vern Nelson and Wes Jones. I'm probably missing somebody, but every meeting, these folks over for years and years, while the rest of us are having dinner, and they've got lives, and they're showing up and saying, we can't stand this corruption. And they'd speak, and they'd be made fun of, and but they kept on going. And it just, that chipping away has been so helpful. And finally, the press started to pick up on it. Anyway, I know I'm kind of going on long, but I've got a bunch of good votes in there. That stadium deal, all those hotel deals were crappy. All the Disney giveaway, hundreds of millions of dollars. The Disney exemption for taxation for 45 years to build the Star Wars land or whatever, which they're going to build anyway. I bought all that stuff and kind of steamrolled over on some of that.
So, Jose, we're going to come back to you, but the talk about the public safety pension increase, I just want to say one thing. This is the legal corruption at the heart of California politics. And again, I'm making an advertisement statement here for my organization. This is, again, a system that allows these massive government employee organizations to contribute money to campaigns, political campaigns, usually through independent expenditures, of course. That's where the real money is, not for the, the 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever individual deal. We're talking, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars at the local level that can make a material difference in a local government. And if you do something to cross that union, you're dead. Right? These people will come after you. They're well organized. They control government. If you're in the teachers union here, apologies. I come from a long line of public school teachers. They hold our kids hostage. If you doubt me, they go on strike. I'm going to ask the doctor here in just a moment. He said in 2019 that he was supportive of the UTLA strike. I was up there in the middle of it. It was ugly. It was vile. They had the cops out there with them. The police unions were out there to support them. The firefighters. They shut down the schools for 5 days. 5 days. In a system, a school system that is so badly in need of reform that the only thing they could really do was pretend they raised the flag of social justice and we're here to support the kids, and they showed it by walking out, right? Somebody could argue, well, it's just 5 days. I ask you, has education in LA gotten better over that time? I have an answer. No, it's gotten worse. One of the worst school districts in this state, dominated by the most powerful union. That's the problem I want to get to. And I'm going to give you the mic, sir. But before we get there, I want to talk about public safety. And John, can I ask you to think about Anaheim for a second? Are you prepared for this? You are brutal. Do I need to talk louder? So, John, what's the impact that you see if you're prepared for this? I mean, there's numbers involved here. I know you can handle that part, but I'm asking you for a city that you may not be intimately familiar with. Can you talk to me about the impact of maybe you can even talk a little bit about unfunded pension liabilities. That's the difference between what we owe public employees as a result of their collective bargaining agreements that that school districts and cities and counties approve, the difference between what we have promised them for retirement and what we're actually willing to put aside for that. And right now in California, that number is somewhere in the low 70s, I think, statewide, high 60s percentages. Pardon? Low 70s, thank you. So what that means is we're about 30% short of what we have promised all these unions. All these union employees, including my mom, that's English for my mother, who's British. That's this really amazing expense. Who's going to pay that? I'm 62. I am not really bloody likely to have to pay that. My kids are moving out of the state because it's too expensive to live here, in part because our taxes are so high, in part because the cost of government here is higher than in most other places. John, talk to us about Anaheim, though.
Well, let's talk about what a defined benefit pension plan is. It allows you to have a formula which is usually the number of years of service times your final salary times a factor. So for police officers and fire, it was 2% at 50 for years. So it's okay to have a defined benefit pension plan because the actuaries are telling you how long that fireman will be in the department and what salary they could expect when they are retiring, how many years they'll probably work, and how long they will live after they retire. So you have to use an actuary to calculate what the payment for the contribution to the plan should be. And you assume we're going to, at that time, earn 8.5% on our investments, which is sort of like the Anaheim Angels making it to the playoffs every year. Just not going to happen. So what happened in 1999, in the middle of the night, on the last day of session, and I have enjoyed 6 of those, crazy time, there was a bill, SB 400, that was signed, or it was actually co-authored by Lou Correa and a few others, and it came at the very end, and no one had a chance to really analyze it, but they had this suspicion that it was okay, but it wasn't. But what it did is it changed the formula from 2% at 50 to 3% at 50. So if 50%. So if you were ready to retire and you were making $100,000, you'd work for 25 years, you were supposed to get 50,000. 2% times 25 times 100,000, you would have gotten 50,000 a year. But when it became 3% at 50, everybody waited. They postponed their retirement, and then they waited for it to become effective, and then they got $75,000 a year. But it wasn't funded for. So when you increase a formula in the middle of the game, when you were 100% funded and you improve the benefit by 50%, you are now 2/3 funded. And that was in 99. Here we are in 22, and we're still 71% funded at CalPERS. So it was one of those things. At the end of the 90s, we had the dot-com boom, and we were making 20, 30% a year in the stock market. And the problem with people is that they think yesterday and today is going to be tomorrow. If we made 20% last year, we're going to make 20% this year, and we'll make 20% next year, and let's go ahead and give ourselves better benefits. No, they should have stepped back and said, these stocks are trading at 60 times earnings per share. That's way above the norm. Let's sell these stocks and let's buy 8% paying bonds. And CalPERS would have been fully funded. We wouldn't have this discussion. But no, they said we ought to increase benefits. And here we are. Here we are, all these years later, still dealing with this unfunded liability. The city of Anaheim is a full-service city, which means it has its own police department, and it has its own fire department. Lake Forest does not. Lake Forest contracts with the sheriff. Lake Forest contracts with the Orange County Fire Authority. So there's about 10 of the 34 cities that are, full service, and they carry it on their books. And Anaheim has been around for what, 160 years, 160. So we've still got a lot of people that are in your plan that are living good, healthy lives. So you have a rather substantial unfunded liability. So that creates more debt than assets. And so you have a balance sheet with the city of Anaheim that has an unfunded not an unfunded liability, but an unrestricted net deficit that's in the $700 million range. You divide that by the number of citizens in the city, the population, and you come up with a metric. Out of 34 cities, Anaheim is in 33rd place. Santa Ana, where we are now, is in 32nd place. Costa Mesa, where I live, is in 34th place. Lake Forest is somewhere in the top 7, because you're not full service and you're new, and you've been very diligent to make sure you don't take on new debts. And I know, Dwight, you were very careful, even with your new city hall. It's a whole different philosophy of managing funds. So now you have to deal with a large liability, and you have to deal with some factors that you do not control, and that is the economy. And the market just went down 6% for CalPERS. They just reported a loss of 6% when they should have made about 7%. So now they're behind 13%. They're going to see an increase in contributions required by the city. And you're going to see that we have inflation. And so now you're going to be paying more for your gas, for your police and fire. I mean, you're going to have all these extra costs, and you're going to get squeezed. You're going to get crowded out. And so I will just conclude with this comment that I had a political consultant come to me, and he said he represents a lot of police officer associations, and we sat down for lunch. And he said, I just want you to know, John, that all police officers do not hate you. Because when I talk about pensions, they take it personally. I'm just talking math, and they take it very personal. But when they instituted 3% at 50 and had to make the higher contributions, the newest hires were laid off. And now we have cities up and down the state of California, 482, but I can name a lot of them, where they've had to reduce their fire departments and their police departments by 25%. And those that were released were the newest hires, last in, first out, boom. So all those young kids are going, really? Really? Why did that city council vote for that pension increase?
I just want to ask you a question, John. So earlier, I think I heard Tom Tait say, Tom, correct me on this, that I think you said that you got, like Disney, for instance, to guarantee some of the debt. Was that right? So what's your response to John about taking the total debt if some of that debt is actually guaranteed by Disney, for instance? And you'll pardon me for not knowing all the details, but is this number the same? Is the math the same?
Well, that debt is about to be paid off. So that debt is fortunately we're about ready to pay that off, and it's performed okay, or actually well. But there's a lot of other debt, which is kind of the new convention center expansion, $200 million. Doesn't make any sense. I voted against that. And then you've got these I mentioned it, these hotel subsidies, hundreds of millions. That's actually it's kind of interesting. So here I'm this conservative Republican, Jose, progressive Democrat, and we've been like this on these issues. And actually, Jose before he's on the council, he would join this group and speak at the mic and say, this makes no sense. and it hurts the people of Anaheim. So that's, a lot of these issues brought us together, so.
John, we'll come back to you with more, but I really want to get to Dr. Moreno, who has long been silent while I've impugned your integrity. So please, sir, hang on one second. Where's that? I saw this Kleenex box. I am not handing you a sweaty microphone. There you are, sir.
Appreciate that. Well, I feel like I've been silent for about 3 years on this council, so I just kind of get used to sitting there. Denise and I just kind of sitting there watching it unfold, trying to make motions, and summarily just being dismissed, and ourselves being ridiculed by the former mayor, while the rest of his court just sat there and grinned. I'm not sure what you asked me to comment on.
Well, you can jump in on anything that's
Oh,
been said,
okay.
or you can take it in a different direction. We really
Oh,
want to
okay.
talk about Anaheim.
Yeah. By the way, I'm a public employee union, part of a bargaining unit. I think what a lot of folks don't realize, since it feels like a partisan space, is a lot of union members are Republicans, and they vote for leadership that does exactly what is being talked about as being a problem for the state. And certainly in Orange County, we know that local municipalities and school boards are dominated by Republicans, who are in fact voting for these public employee contracts. So that's why for me, these issues are not necessarily a function of whether it's the state government or local government. At the end, people vote for the local folks. The local folks see it as a stepping stone to go on to the state level, and that's what ends up creating a lot of these conditions for us. What brought Mayor Tait and I together is, frankly, I think district elections, first of all, is that in our communities in Anaheim, what folks often forget is that while many see the city as the happiest place on earth, it is a 5-mile radius of the city. And just on the outskirts of our city, we named Bruno Serrato a CNN Hero of the Year because he feeds 1,000 children every day. Across the street from the wealthiest corporation, potentially, next to Apple probably, but certainly the most powerful media conglomerate in the world, I would argue. And there's 1,000 children every day who depend on the kindness of Bruno Serrato to just get the basics. So I was on the school board in 2006 to 2014 when we hit our recession, and we were decimated by budget cuts and the recession of 2006-07. Our budget at the time was $180 million to serve 20,000 children in Anaheim, 95% of whom were on free and reduced lunch. Now I believe it's 98%. 67% academic English learners. Children do know English. It's the academic English that even children born in an English-speaking home don't speak English academically when they come to school. So that was our context on the school board, and our teachers were decimated. Supplies were decimated. Our arts, music programs were decimated. We were working under a federal law championed by George Bush that said testing is the most important thing to measure a school. And anyone who's been in education knows that a number should not define learning. It should be a measure, but it should not be the preordinate measure to determine the quality of a school. So what happens is the school districts at that point began to really focus because parents thought that that measure meant something. And then it became a political football, education, because of this one measure. Folks who often don't step a foot in our schools don't know the kind of work that is happening in our schools and proclaim them failing because of a test score. I'm not suggesting that there's nothing wrong with our schools, but I'll just say that in that time, I was school board president for 2 terms, and it was impossible to serve our children, even though we were investing in our teachers and trying, and even because of some school board direction, doubling down on test scores as a priority. The Obama administration did the same thing, by the way, again, bipartisan efforts on testing. And we watched teachers and families struggle through this. And even our best teachers and our best administrators said there's only so much you can do when at 2:30 the children go home and there's 2 other families living in that apartment. There aren't community centers that are full service community centers. Our Ponderosa Library, which was a joint use agreement, we built a new library, the school district did, through bond dollars. we did a joint use with the city. Kurt Pringle promised that upon opening that library, the city would then operate it in the afternoon and the evening, a joint use agreement, which is great. But that library stayed closed for 2 years. And when I went to the city council and I asked Mayor Pringle to consider the social context of our children as he thought about cutting libraries, not opening libraries, cutting community services, he said, well, if you want us to run the schools, we can do that, but you're a different agency. We don't run the schools here. And so to me, that really struck me, that we're talking about our children. It's not about whether they belong to the schools or to the city. These are our children. And if education is going to thrive, we need a comprehensive approach in our city to say these are our children. And I approached Disney because in Irvine during that time, the Irvine company went to the school district and said, we will provide you $10 million so you can sustain your music and your arts program so you don't have to cut them. That was an investment of a corporate, social, responsible player. But it wasn't only because they were kind. As we learned in Irvine, when you seek to buy property or to move to Irvine, front full-page ads are the schools to attract people to come live in Irvine. So they knew it was an investment as well in their own city. The city council then moved in Irvine to ask the voters for a 5-year, I believe it was a 5-year sales tax that would go directly to the schools to invest in arts and music. So for me, it was painful to listen to people talk about the failures of Anaheim schools when our major corporation, when we approached them, they said, well, we're struggling too. And we go to our city and they say, that's not our job. So we're saying our children are your job, right? So I say that as a context of how often, be it partisan or ideological views, in times of crisis, put us in spaces that don't allow us to think about what's most important. And our children end up getting held hostage by that, and so do our families. So when Tom Tait was elected mayor, we invited him to a group that I'm a part of, Los Amigos of Orange County. We're 44 years, just meeting every Wednesday for breakfast to talk about issues in the community, to help people, most importantly. And we invited Mayor Tait to come talk about district elections. We had been pushing the community overall for decades for district elections in Anaheim because we knew that city council, whether they were Democrats or Republicans, although majority overwhelmingly Republicans, were just not going to listen to the gadflies. They were not going to pay attention because when you look at who was funding their campaigns, there was no way they were going to, they still don't, that's right. There was no way they were going to funnel resources in a balanced way towards the people who actually live in the city. The focus was on the children of tourists, not on the children of Anaheim. And so we knew that, and we knew that to have a chance to change that council, or at least the outcomes of the decision-making, to a kinder city, we needed district elections. So we filed a lawsuit to move that, and it was under a civil rights lawsuit under the California Voting Rights Act. Many folks said, oh, that's race baiting. Why would we do that with you? We said, well, first of all, the data shows very clearly that there's racially polarized voting in Anaheim. If you had a Spanish surname, you were not going to get elected. You were not going to get elected. So, or you needed so much money, and you had to commit yourself so much to these special interests to even have a chance. We also reminded people in Anaheim who said this is only about race, is that on the west side of Anaheim, the furthest place from the resort, it had been over 22 years since there had been a council member representing West Anaheim. And we would regularly hear people from West Anaheim coming to say, when are you going to fix our streets? When are you going to fix our lights? What about our parks? Right? So that's what brought me to this conversation. And when we began to pay closer attention to the policies of the council, it was all about, at that point, $700 million in corporate welfare to the largest donors to their campaigns. It was about the police union, who we also, Tom, give him a lot of credit because he took a lot of hits on the law enforcement side as being soft on crime because he had the gall to say, we shouldn't be shooting young men in the back. Anaheim, we shouldn't be doing that. And we should investigate that. We should investigate ourselves as government as much as we want to investigate other forms of corruption. And so as a result, we have a police review board. It needs a lot of work still, but we have that. So for me, the message today is that the struggle in Anaheim, which I believe is true in every city, is that we are a company town. And everybody knows it, everybody has seen it, and everybody's contributed to it. And the gadflies come and they get made fun of, and and the Voice of OC writes a story, and they're called slanted. The Orange County Register writes a story, and folks are like, oh, now it's real, right? And it is, because that is the paper of record. But what I've learned being on the city council and through the school board is what gets lost in all of this is ultimately that the policies that we produce aren't authentic because they're not debated in public. Tom and I would often argue, we wish we had the ability as a conservative and as a, I'll say Bernie-crat, as a Bernie-crat, to actually deliberate in public about the merits of our viewpoints about policy, and I bet we come up with better policy than either one of us would have. We were able to do that for a couple years. But outside of that, and I'll close with this, is one of the first things that really struck me about what we were doing and who was watching is I was asked by a government class in Anaheim High School to go and talk about city council. And one of the young women asked, what's the hardest part about being on council? Because they got a chance to watch some videos and to watch some of our council meetings. And I said, what's the hardest part? It seems like there's a lot of arguing. And I said, the hardest part of being on a city council, at least in Anaheim, and that, I don't know if this may be true for other cities, is I realized at some point we're not debating with people who are in the room. People came in with predetermined decisions, often already collaborated decisions through a cabal, we now know. And so there was nothing that could be said that night that might get them to think differently about a policy position. And that's where I value Tom Tait, Denise, James Vanderbilt, is that night it was all about who came to speak to us, what did we study, what have people said to us, and what is our own thoughts about what's best. But you can't do that with a cabal because they've already decided what's going to happen, and it's no matter the merit of the argument. And that's what undermines democracy. And that's what brings me here today, and again, grateful for the public conversation on it.
Okay, so just a couple of hot seat questions for you here, Dr. Moreno. So one of the issues that was near and dear to my heart was the Palm Lane School. So those of you who don't, anybody, Palm Lane Elementary, I was sort of adjacent to the people who were doing the real work, and it was parents of low-income parents of kids who were in a really failing school. I believe at the time that I first got involved, Palm Lane Elementary was, I think, the worst school in Anaheim. And the parents used a state law called the trigger law to transition it to a charter school. I talked to Tom about this at the time, and it was the opposite, Dr. Moreno, of what you say, where, that you say that the city ought to, and I agree with you, the city ought to be really invested in the schools. Like, I think city officials are not somehow immune from what goes on in the schools. And Tom, I hope I'm not pulling the sheets on you here, but you told me, Tom, look, that's the school district's decision about what goes on there, and I don't really want to say anything about that. We don't tread on their territory. That's their deal. But I was talking to parents frequently through a translator whose experience in that school was that they were being given, as my late great rural father-in-law used to say, hind teat. They were getting served last, and they had to fight the school district that I think you were on the board of at the time. They had to fight for their statutory right, and the school district spent, I want to say $2 million to $2 million fighting these minority parents for their right to have a school that worked for their kids. And in I think, 4 years of litigation that went on, those kids didn't get a better education. They were told basically, get to the back of the bus, wait in line. The moral high ground there, I think, would have been to acknowledge these parents of low-income families, that they had a right to be upset and to take their school in a different direction. And 1 year after that school transitioned, student performance, that I understand you disagree that student performance on testing is not as relevant as I do. I think it's a measure, and I think we agree on that. It's a measure. The student performance rocketed, and it went from the worst school to one of the highest performing elementary schools. That's incumbency. That's people working for the teachers union to make sure they don't lose control of a union-run school. Tell me where I'm wrong, please.
You're completely wrong. But that's not what I'm here to talk about, because that would, because there's a good story to that engagement with the families there, and what actually precipitated that trigger. I'll just say this at this point. I think anyone should be concerned because there was when on a vote of a trigger, 50% plus one, that leaves 400 other families out of luck. What happens to those folks? So we can't treat it like a traditional democratic election of winners and losers, is when 50% plus one of parents vote to do something, there's losers there. So 400 other parents may have voted not to do that. So that's why it makes it a little bit more complex, I think, on the day-to-day operations. And the thing about academic progress, that school district, I was part of a board, the president of the board, that we did approve a charter school. And I did feel the heat about that. And we really scrutinized that application and who were the folks that were proposing it and where it was coming from. And they weren't proposing a school takeover. They were proposing to meet the actual spirit and ethic of the law, which is to provide a service or education that the district cannot or will not provide, that is not provided for in other parts. But that's a different conversation. I'm happy to join that forum because there's a deep thing about that. But there's a perception about the idea that that was teachers' union. The litigation happened after I left. I left in 2014. But again, right now, the school district was just voted the top school district in North County by parents. That school district is the only district where every school has a dual language immersion program, which is shown to be, by research, the most effective academic accelerator for academic English learners, but also for English dominant folks to learn a second language, which is really popular in South County. And when our parents learned, why does South County get those programs, but not ours? That school district is now the only district in the nation to offer music and education at every grade level, every single grade level. So we could talk a lot more about those processes, but the reason the jurisdiction question is that children are not a jurisdiction issue. I didn't go and ask the city council to do something different within their own agency. I just simply said, the budget cuts that you're doing have an impact on neighborhoods, and the condition of neighborhoods has an impact on schools. And so we invest a lot of money in our schools, and if we know that that undermines that effort, that's a waste of taxpayer money. How do we make sure that we collaborate on that? But just, again, I voted for a charter school, so I certainly am not anti the whole idea. And CTA, by the way, sponsors charter schools too. I don't know if you know that. They have it on their website. They actually sponsor charter schools. So that's a very complex conversation. But in Anaheim, what mattered the most to me is our children were starved because the focus was on the cronyism of tourism and the focus on the children of tourists and not on their very own children. And again, that was Democrats and Republicans on the council. And we see that in every city. The city of Cypress is going through this. Francis Marquez, Democrat, who is fighting to expose the contract of the trash collector there. There seems to be some funny stuff going on there. And she's fighting it. And they're trying to censor her, and they have censored her and censored her there. So the fight against cronyism is certainly one that again, I appreciate that we're having, and would love to know more about other cities.
I just want to say, Jose mentioned the other charter school. I was mayor at the time. You were president of the school board, and this group came and wanted to start a charter school called Goals Academy, and I knew the people behind it, and I went and spoke to the school board. People didn't think they stood a chance because it's and Jose voted for it and just got the snot beat out of him, but he did it. And then Palm Lane came. He got beat up terribly. I got beat up some. There's two sides to that story. I was hearing two sides, and the other side there's a compelling side to the other sides of that story too. So it was, but Jose got beat up really bad for being anti-charter, where he had voted for and supported a charter probably just 2 years before that.
I just got in direction that we need to talk about cronyism, and I just want to say to one of my benefactors, Matt Holder, this is cronyism to me. This is where, you bring in powerful interests and you allow them to dictate education. You guys brought up education, talked about how important it is for the city to be invested in education. I'm telling you, Palm Lane's a counterexample to that. And I also want to point out that, you're not alone in having a lot of, I'm sorry, that it's not the corporate guys, who represent the large hoteliers or Disney who are alone in bringing money. I think in my research I found this, that Local 11 Unite Here, the hotel workers, I think they dumped about $2 million into a political campaign on your behalf. That was to bring the district voting. And they have supported you, you have supported them. So I'll give you guys back the mic here, but I just want to say that for me, cronyism, where's Matt? Matt, where are you? What do you want to hear? Because I think this is part of the problem. And if you disagree, go ahead and. Sure. Okay, so let's talk about that. But I want to say, just, I think I've made my point, but thank you. Do you want to add to that, Tom?
Well, I just want to, you mentioned the local Unite Here, the money spent on the district elections. That was a problem in Anaheim. And all the crony crowd fought that like crazy. And I was very pleased to see that somebody was willing to spend some money behind it. I supported district elections because in Anaheim, you've got a city that's 22 miles from end to end. And to have everybody elected at large, you could be Mother Teresa living in West Anaheim, and no one's going to know about her in Anaheim Hills, or vice versa. So it means that it takes a lot of money without district elections to run a campaign, a lot of money, because you have to communicate the whole city. So that's why it was being controlled, and that really did a lot for the cronyism, the history of cronyism in Anaheim. We got district elections passed by 70% of the people, all through. I wrote the argument. Jose brought the lawsuit. Anaheim's a better place, and for 2 years with district elections, we were able to wrestle control from the moneyed interest. Denise Barnes got elected. Somebody, just a wonderful person in the community. We convinced her to run, Michelle Montgomery and I, and thank God she had the courage, but a huge amount of money against her, and she won anyway. 4 years later, they wouldn't have anything to do. They spent a mountain of money. I don't know how much Disney spent, quadrupled, and took out a very good incumbent who questions these deals. So anyway, it's just Unite Here, but here I found myself an ally with Unite Here on district elections.
I think it is my pocket ringing. Thank you. Okay, so guys, Matt Holder requests more focus on the detail of the recent revelations from the FBI. Let's ask you guys to go ahead and dig into some of the details that struck you specifically, and then I want to try to bring it around to why Lake Forest is an exception. John mentioned that we have a former mayor here and a business guy, so we want to talk about other cities and why they are less susceptible to this sort of thing. But Dr. Moreno, why don't I hand you the mic, and maybe you can tell me, because you've undoubtedly looked at the FBI affidavits, what stuck out to you most prominently?
I guess I would add then to me the definition, because I thought it was a great point you just brought up about other spaces that provide a lot of funding. Ultimately, and I said this during the ordinance that I proposed on campaign finance reform, is that it's really about, the cronyism is about providing policies or contracts or development projects that benefit directly the financial interest of your donors. If Disney wants to spend millions of dollars on the elections, that's, according to the Supreme Court, they're right. But if they spend it, and then as a result, council members tacitly end up supporting that without question, that's cronyism, borderline bribery.
Can I ask you, you had a great line at one of the meetings, I think you said, and pardon me if I'm speaking into the mic, but you said something about, at some point, there's a kind of campaign going on.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I'll use the case of Harry Sadu to tie it to keep it to. I almost feel like he's our city attorney. Stay within the Brown Act on the agenda. Harry Sadu came into office. He had run for assembly unsuccessfully, pulled out or loaned himself out of his own bank account, I believe $150,000 to run for assembly. He lost, and that campaign debt sits there. He doesn't get his money back, right? Because the money's spent. He then runs for mayor a few years later and loans his campaign $100,000. So now he's got $250,000 of his own personal money that he's invested in his campaigns. The only way that I've seen that folks are able to pay that debt off is they do debt relief fundraisers. Because he didn't win the assembly, there was no debt relief fundraiser because who cares that Harry has a debt? There's nothing I can get from him. That's a cronyism. The interests who fund politics say, there's nothing you could do for us, Harry. Why am I going to go help you relieve your own debt? You bet on yourself, you lost. He wins for mayor, and within a month, he agendizes restoring the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim lease, which they opted out of. Within a month, he agendized to restore it. Within a month, he put a project together that gave the president of the board of the Chamber of Commerce a $700,000 no-bid contract to renovate a warehouse for homelessness. That was Chamber of Commerce for 30 days because we had already gotten some shelters that were on the process of being built. So what the story of the FBI tells us is what Harry then did, and I showed this to the city council on why campaign finance was so important, is he then proceeded, and Jeff Flint was his lead campaign fundraiser, pulling people in saying, if you want an audience with the mayor, you need to go to his fundraiser. You'll have some time with him. So that's where you're right. Well, they play it smart. And so what did Harry do? He was able to relieve his debt within 16 months, $250,000, including his assembly debt while he's mayor of Anaheim. Disney was helping. Orange County Business Council was helping. A lot of folks were helping on that. The Chamber of Commerce, of course, the multinational corporation hoteliers, and other cronies who are benefiting from everything that he was proposing to the city of Anaheim. And when you look at who the preferred developer is right now in Anaheim, they have 8 projects that have been ushered in by Harry, through Harry, is Greenlaw Development. They're the preferred developer of our city right now. They have 8 projects, and they were instrumental in raising money for Harry and with Harry. So for me, the story of the FBI is that, so what I said is it's one check away, because now what happens is when you go give Harry $2,000 towards his campaign debt and that campaign fundraiser, you make the check to Harry Sadu's debt relief campaign or campaign committee. The committee then writes Harry a check. So he gets his money restored. That's one check short of a bribe, which we learned from Tim. That's a bribe, right, Tim? Right. So that was what I had mentioned. That was part of our campaign finance that would only have allowed them up to 6 months to relieve their debt, whether you won or lost. And after that, that's just, you have to eat it. I also proposed an ordinance, in that ordinance, that council members would have to recuse themselves for 12 months from voting on any development or contract that would be of benefit to a financial contributor to their campaign, including PACs. Because the money isn't because Disney gave Harry $2,000. It's that Disney invested $800,000 through a PAC. It's through Greenlaw, invested hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so we included the PACs, and there was concern of whether that was constitutional, because you're not supposed to collaborate with PACs. But what we said is, as long as you're aware that they did that, now maybe they might not fund you so much because they know you can't vote on their project. So if they really believe in you because they love you, Harry, good for them. But they're not giving you the money because you're a nice guy. They want something in return, and that's the unspoken quid pro quo. And that's what the FBI report ended up finding out, is that Harry, on the Anaheim Stadium deal, accelerated the deal, and Todd Ament was wired from the Chamber of Commerce after he was charged, or arrested, I should say, or told, if you don't cooperate, it'll be worse for you. And in one of those recordings, Harry said, I was going to ask them to give me $500,000 towards my reelection, but we've got this done so fast, and it's been such a good deal for them, I'm going to ask for $1 million. That's what he was caught on, right, in terms of the tape.
Thank you. Can you go, Tom, go, same question, Tom. FBI, affidavits, what did you
Can I
know?
add one more thing? But I remind everyone, Harry's one vote. And it was consistently 5 votes in support of each of these deals, and 5 votes that consistently would not allow Denise Barnes or I to motion for anything that would bring good government and transparency to that process. So that's where we're still asking well, to the extent they're willing, to the city council, we have to keep our eye on that too. You all collaborated, you're all implicated. So we need to make sure that the people of Anaheim and Orange County realize no matter what the cronyism is, it still needs 4 votes or 3 votes, depending on your council majority.
So, as I said, I'm former mayor, so that's a very important term these days. But so Jose's been dealing with all this latest stuff with the stadium and Denise when Denise was there, and part of what they did when I left being mayor, one of the first things they did is they said you need because now they had Denise on the council and Jose. And 2 people who would speak in opposition to this stuff. And they passed a rule that said you need 3 votes to put something on the agenda. So you think about that. So when I was mayor, any council member could put anything on the agenda. And they actually tried to limit, on the Angel Stadium deal back in 2013, they tried to limit my powers as mayor to even put anything on the agenda because they didn't want me talking about it publicly. So I think that's, so you had Jose and Denise desperately trying to talk about this deal as it was going through. Another thing on the stadium deal, when I was mayor, but the last month there, this is in October of 18, we get a letter from the Angels saying we put you on notice that we are going to terminate our lease. This is right before the election. So that lease I mentioned back in 1996 that we don't get any money from. Part of what the Angels have is they've had 12,000 spaces of parking easement. So it limits the value of what you can sell that for as long as that lease is on there. Because if you sell it to somebody, they got to wait till that lease terminates before they can really build anything. You still have about 40 acres. So they send that notice. I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing because now it frees up the property. And we put it on the agenda that night. We vote to accept it. There's the supporters or our opponents fought that, but we voted to accept it. And then we voted to have an appraisal done of the property because now at that moment it was unencumbered and the city owned it as soon as the season would be over. Unencumbered property, I think, is worth billions, to tell you the truth. What's 150 acres already entitled for 5,000 residential units? 3 million square feet of commercial, 3 million square feet of retail, and a stadium, first-class stadium, and the Grove also. 150 acres, where 3 freeways come together in Orange County. I think it's worth billions.
The price tag was $326 million.
Well, here's what happened. So we asked for the appraisal as a council. Harry had won the election. I leave, he takes office. In January, he puts on the agenda that we want to give a 1-year extension to the Angels to negotiate, so we don't have this pressure of negotiation. I saw that, I go, that's outrageous, but they did it. No one, he read the agenda, he wouldn't know it, but what they did is they reinstated that crappy lease from 1996, which put that easement for all that parking back on, totally encumbered the land. So at that point in January, the property went from billions to maybe 300 million. We asked for appraisal done unencumbered. That never happened. There's never a council vote that said it wouldn't happen. But so there's never appraisal on unencumbered property. The appraisal comes in later as encumbered property, puts it at 325 million. They end up selling it for 150 million. And then fortunately, it didn't happen because of the FBI and things like that.
Is it possible?
And people fighting, like people in this room.
Is it possible, Dr. Moreno? I mean, you're still in office. Is it possible the FBI, and anybody can answer this, Tom, you too perhaps, but is it possible the FBI sees this deal going through and that's what prompts them to move quickly? Because once that deal's done, it's done, right? And it's harder to unwind, I think, at that point. Is that something that triggers the FBI to release in I think it was May 16th, to release its affidavit? Doctor, you want to talk first?
I can't say for certainty, but also it was the day that, it was days after the city council voted on a stipulated settlement with the state of California on the Housing and Community Development Agency violation of the Surplus Land Act, which is something that Denise and I brought up when the deal was being reviewed by the council. Does this violate the Surplus Land Act? And we were told no. And ultimately it did, as it turns out. So we had been negotiating, the city had been negotiating with Rob Bonta about that after Housing Community Development Agency referred the case to him because he's the enforcer of the law. And so the city came to a judgment of an agreement, which was put out the weekend of before the council meeting that we were having. So again, the public had very little time to examine even that. And that's kind of the story of cronyism as well, is a lot of agenda items in Anaheim are placed by cronies through crony-developed ordinances or policies or ideas, economic ideas. They're put on the agenda on a Friday or now a Thursday, and then you vote on them on Tuesday. So the people don't even have a chance to review the deal, let alone the council members. And these deals are so complex, I don't think any of us, even the CPA, could figure it out in 3 days, let alone get feedback from your constituents. And that's the purpose of an elected representative body, is to get feedback from your constituents, including businesses and small businesses. But there's no opportunity because, again, it's already cooked and baked. Is that the right word? Did I say that right? It's baked? It's baked? Good? Cooked? Baked? That's right, Chick Hearn. Chick Hearn and Vince Scully. So anyway, that I think ultimately is what leads to these kind of decisions, which the grand jury said was a betrayal of Anaheim's constituents. And contributes to uninformed decision-making by the city council. And so that's how it played out.
Okay.
I just want to say, because it is interesting that this last deal was voted on December 20th. That was during COVID.
Initial purchase?
No, not the initial, the stadium.
The benefits, the community benefits,
the
development agreement.
Yeah, December 20th. I think it was a Friday afternoon. You guys would know.
No, the original purchase was on December 20th, 2019.
Yes.
So the original purchase was December 20th, 2019, but there still had to be negotiations about the credits, the community benefits. Will it be housing? Who will pay for it? And the development agreement still needs to be ironed out. So that came back to council September 2020 during COVID.
Anyway, but to have a council meeting on a Friday before Christmas says you don't want anyone watching. That's what it said to me.
Okay, so I'm going to make an executive decision and skip a part where I talk about how you can avoid all this stuff. We've got a policy paper up here that's to the left of John Moorlach, to the right of Dr. Moreno. And there's some things there that especially public officials may find interesting about what you can do to avoid crony capitalism, corporate welfare, union insider dealing. Of course, it's written from our perspective at California Policy Center, so there's a lot of free market language in there. Please don't be offended if that's the thing you just like a bore. There's a reason, I would argue, that Dr. Moreno's family came here, and it was for freedom, and they experienced it. They've got, what, 3 doctors in that family now?
We already have freedom.
Did you? And you came here and why did you?
Mexico's a democracy.
We can have that conversation in another town hall.
And then you can tell me how Anaheim's a democracy or Orange County is.
Sure, absolutely delighted. But that's a conversation for another night. Because I want to turn now to Dwight here and ask if you would just tell us, like, why is it different in a place like Lake Forest? You've seen the story of Anaheim. You don't see this kind of stuff typically, in a city like Lake Forest. What advantages do you have there? What protections do you have in place? The most harrowing thing to hear here is, these sort of impromptu council meetings, changes in who can agendize something. These are really distress signals, I think, in the system. How does a city like Lake Forest stack up against that, and what protections are in place other than a vigilant public? You know, like in the end, I think that Dr. Moreno said it, you know, the people vote for this stuff. You know, they vote for these things. They vote for the electeds who bring them on.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I appreciate the opportunity. I think the first main difference between Anaheim and cities like Lake Forest is you have a full service city in Anaheim, as was mentioned. You've got the police and fire. You've got a ton of city staff. Whereas in towns like Lake Forest, when I was on the council, we had staff numbering in the high 60s to low 70s. That's probably the planning department in Anaheim. and, you know, there's clearly a difference in size of our populations, but we're about 85,000. You're about 340, something like that. So, you know, we're about a fourth the size, but our staff is very, very small, right? And because of that, we don't have the unfunded pension liability because we contract out so many services. So we're not going to have the challenges with the unions and that type of cronyism that's occurring, but we're going to have it with private companies and contracting. Both are a problem, a serious problem, because when unions are benefiting or private businesses are benefiting because of cronyism, residents are losing. Okay, whether it's the single mom that Jose might talk about who, you know, is struggling and the kids are having to go, you know, get a spaghetti meal, or it's someone who's driving a nice car. Every single person in that town is losing out because either that union's benefiting in the bigger city, the full service city, or some private businesses. So the difference, I would say, in a town like Lake Forest is we do have an engaged public, a very engaged public, and we have solid council members. We try to make sure that we've got people that are focused on the residents and aren't focused on, in our case, would be the private businesses that are trying to get contracts. But there are problems everywhere, as Will mentioned in his introduction here. Every single city has it. I can tell you about $30,000 contracts, not $5 million to Fry's, but a little $30,000 contract that is being manipulated behind the scenes in a small town, right? So, and whatever manipulation is occurring, again, is money that's being taken out that can't be spent on filling a pothole, can't be spent making sure that public safety is occurring, that we can, catalytic converters aren't being stolen out of our driveways, things like that. So, you know, this is a pervasive problem, and it's vigilance. That's the reason why you all are here. That's why hopefully there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands more that will watch this video. And we need to continue to make sure that the public is engaged, that they're watchdogs, they're looking at their council members, they're looking at their school board members, all along the way. They're even, you know, paying attention to the city staff. We're in a small city. The city manager is there all the time. You know, all of our cities, you know, we don't have full-time city councils in Orange County. You go up to Los Angeles, completely different. Where I have to run my business, you know, and one of the first things that I learned in taking over my business is that there's a former city council member that we've hired to be our government affairs consultant who's going to help us with any problems with the city, right? And that's what we have to do. And when we want to get a meeting, then, you know, we need to go through him, and he knows everybody, and, you know, that's how it works. And, you know, as our cities mature here in Orange County, I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that. And Anaheim being, you know, the biggest budget, you know, they probably already have that, but it permeates all the way down to, you know, some of the small cities. And, you know, if you haven't hired this consultant to try to get your contract, then it's a little bit harder to work with the city staff because they like this person, right? And so, you know, again, just vigilance.
Thanks very much. My side interest is in logistics, believe it or not. I'm a geek about this. We can talk about that another time. Okay, so one more executive decision that's going to disappoint loads of people, but I do want to get to you because you were one of the early questioners. Go ahead and use your mouth. Let me give you the mic. And for everybody else, I am so sorry, but we do have hors d'oeuvres, refreshments, light and heavy, as I'm told. And you can ask questions and mingle afterward, but please, what's your name, where are you from, question?
I'm Ari. I'm from Anaheim. I know a lot of the folks here, and I have a question for former Mayor Tait and for current Councilman Dr. Moreno. You guys were referring to the old $1 lease program under the Angels, and I am too young to remember whether or not that got heavy media coverage in the paper record, in the Voice of, I don't know if Voice of OC was covering it back then, etc. My main question is, what is the quote fair market legal justification for that? A, and B, if 60 Minutes had honed in on that and said Disney is pillaging Anaheim as boomtown, what is the other argument that a Disney lobbyist would say to 60 Minutes? That's what I'm curious about. What's the legalistic argument? Thank you.
Good question. Thank you. Doctor?
I could just tell you what Disney says to the media is we're a job creator. We create jobs, and people who support Disney will say Anaheim would be nothing without Disney. Which Mayor Tait would say, well, we'd be Orange, we'd be Fullerton, we'd be Aliso Viejo, we'd be fine, we'd be okay. But that's the argument, is that Disney and the hotel, these multinational hotel chains, are the economic engine of Anaheim, and so that's always what the talking point that we hear. And some of us say, but every engine has a combustion to it, and people have to live with some of that pollution, and that tends to be the rest of the city. Exactly.
So you mentioned that $1 a year. How can you possibly justify that? And you can't. That's just it. But they did. And there are consultants out there or firms that will do a study. They'll say that if you keep the Angels, you will get this much economic activity, this much taxes, and it's a great financial thing. And none of them make sense. None of the ones that, at least the ones brought forth in Anaheim, they don't make sense at all. In fact, one of them, I think they copied right off of, someone caught them. I think maybe, I don't know who caught them, but Voice of OC, I think, copying the exact same report they gave to the city of Baltimore. So they don't make any sense, but there's justification, and the Chamber of Commerce would come up and say, this makes all sorts of sense, and it's hard to stand up against that stuff because it's like the Angels or it's Disney, and I think I would, and I know Jose and Dwight and John, and you kind of mentioned this. It's about who you represent, and if you have a clear understanding of who you represent, then these decisions become a little easier, and become a lot easier actually. And the ones in Anaheim just were so far out of the range of any reasonableness. I mean, how can you give a hotelier $300 million, one, and all the other ones don't get one? And how's that help the city of Anaheim? And you think, John, you mentioned we're 30. You wrote an op-ed, and I think Trevor O'Neill wrote an opposition to it. You're just basically pointing out that Anaheim's 33rd. So you'd think, when you come to Anaheim, you would think you drive through and you'd go through the neighborhoods and you'd see the open libraries and you'd see the streets paved really well. And you'd say, well, that kind of makes sense. And you have those great youth programs going on. And you'd say, well, it kind of makes sense. They have Disneyland here. All these people coming in with all this, spending all this money. Why are we 33rd? And why do we have, Jose brings us up, we have one pool that they gave lessons, the YMCA, I think they leased out the YMCA, but to open swim, they didn't have any because there wasn't any budget for it. One pool, no kids cannot swim. And yet we have Disneyland and the biggest convention center on the West Coast. So anyway, I think Jose kind of summed it up with what Disney would say. They're a job creator, economic engine, all these things, and any business is wonderful and good, but the people's money is the people's money, And I think what helped me is I thought about a couple things. I thought about actually being in Angel Stadium. And I thought if you're sitting on the mound, standing on the mound, looking out, and there's 35,000 people are in that stadium, and you times it by 10. That's the number of people. And most of them probably don't know who the mayor is or even think about it. But if they do, they think about that person supposed to be looking after their best interest. That's a powerful thought. And then you think about the special interests, and maybe they take up a section or two. So that helped me. Then I also think about, I think about an 8-year-old kid living on Anna Drive, that's where we had the issues and the civil unrest, officer involved shooting a few years ago. And I met some of those kids, got to know them a little bit. And I think, how can, does this decision help that kid? Yes or no? And they're pretty easy when you start looking at things like that. And it gives you actually a little bit of courage.
All right, John Moorlach, final words here. Then we're going to get to special conversation right after.
Thank you, Will. If we peel it all off, everything we've seen, we know that as human beings, we're focused on our own self-interest. Everybody's focused on their own self-interest. Disney's focused. Public employee unions are focused on. And so that's just human nature. Why are you doing that? Oh, I'm doing it because it benefits me. That's why I'm doing it. That's how capitalism works, is we're trying to deal with how we can take care of our self-interest. What we're learning is that he who has the gold rules. And Disney had the gold, and Disney had the ability, and others. In my city, it was the unions. It was more of a union town. As soon as they had a majority of council members, they opened those MOUs right away. But self-interest, this is how it works. And I would say, Will, how do we do two things? How do we find the balance, in this political world? It used to be Republicans versus Democrats, right? It was, like Coyote and the Roadrunner, right? It's like, this is what we do. And now it's all, well, now the unions are an ATM, and you go to the ATM and there's your lack of balance. And so the next question is, what are the results? And Tom, you hit it, is that now you're in 33rd place. And so Jose comes up with an idea. And if Jose would have said, we'll take that tax revenue for the next 10 years and just focus it on paying down the debt. But you pay down the debt and you remove the interest costs, you're going to have plenty of money for pools. And so how do we, because we're looking at train wrecks. It's, should this recession continue? We've been here before, right, Jose? I was chairman of the board of supervisors in 2008. It was not pleasant laying off 1,000 employees. But something's going to happen. Something's going to break. And so how do we deal with that moving forward?
Yeah, the last time John Moorlach said something like that was on a CLEO call. CLEO, for those of you who aren't in on the acronym, is California Local Elected Officials Project. Mary is the executive director of that. Lance Christensen in the back helps run it. He's also running, just a quick word, for State Superintendent of Public Instruction. But they run this organization, and we had John Moorlach on just after, I think it was just after COVID started, and it was a Zoom call. And we were talking about, so how are cities going to survive in the age of COVID when the sales tax revenue tanks? And John went somewhere in that conversation I never anticipated. He said, we're going to have Chapter 9 bankruptcies up and down the state. Well, then Donald Trump and then Joe Biden pumped trillions into state and local government that kept all those balance sheets buoyant for just a little longer. So when I hear John get anxious, I get a case of the Fantods, as my grandmother used to say. It's really anxiety provoking. All right, so I want to thank John for providing the ballast here in terms of numbers. Jose for stepping into the lion's den. Thank you, sir. Tom Tait, you and Jose, a great example of people who might disagree on a number of things, but get along with each other and work where you can on this important issue. And Dwight, who sat meditating, I think, as a Buddhist monk might. Special session coming up after this where we just talked to Dwight for 2 hours. But for our final segment of the evening, I want to bring Tom Tait. So I'm going to ask everybody else if they'll depart here. We'll let Tom stay up. Matt Holder, can you come on up? So I want to bring Matt Holder up. He's going to discuss with Tom some of, a little bit more of the details of the Anaheim situation, but most importantly, a side project that Tom has going on that he's super enthusiastic about. Is that what the shirt means right there, Denise? Can you stand up and show everybody the shirt? This is really cool. Show the folks at home on the camera. And maybe you can just, sorry, you can explain.
Thank you so much. I just want you to know that being on Team Tait for the 2 years that were really glorious, the City of Kindness was voted on, and we were so proud to make that happen. So anytime I see kindness, it just warms my heart. Being an advocate for senior citizens has also warmed my heart, so I'm very kind. But thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to know you have a place in your heart for senior citizens. I am one. All right, so Matt Holder has been involved in Orange County politics for the last 25 years. His son is here and is a superb hockey player. More importantly, Matt was literally in the foxhole with Tom throughout the duration of his tenure as an elected official in Anaheim. Along with former State Senator John Lewis, Matt served as Tom Tait's political consultant when he ran for city council in 1996. That's been seminal in our conversation tonight, and again in 2020, then again as mayor in 2010 and 2014. You also worked alongside Tom as a council aide to Denise Barnes. Who's Denise Barnes? Oh yeah, the lady with the shirt from 2017 to 2018. Cleaning off the microphone, Matt Holder, take over and speak into the mic so the folks at home can hear you.
All right, thank you, Will. I want to thank CPC, all their great work putting on this forum. Their California Local Elected Officials program is just outstanding. They do a lot of great work, so thank you to Will and Mary Barkey, who was instrumental in putting on this event, and our sponsor, Epoch Times. Appreciate you guys and all the advertising you did for this event. So thank you all for that support, and thank you all for being here. An incredibly important topic. Cronyism, and I think it's a little bit difficult to get our arms around what cronyism is. I do want to start out by talking to Tom a little bit about why he ran for mayor in the first place. In 2010, we had a conversation with me and John Lewis, and he gave us his platform. And so I kind of want to let Tom tell us briefly about his platform, why he wanted to be mayor. But I also do want to point out to my son Owen, as Will said, it was his 18th birthday on Monday, so happy birthday again. I'm very proud of you. So we'll go back to Tom and his platform running for mayor and why it's important and how it how you use that to govern in Anaheim.
Thank you, Matt. I think in 1996, I was sort of young. You were very young. You were right out of college. Yeah, we both had hair. Yeah. So I think it's what ties a lot of this together, and maybe it's a different way of looking at governing, I think, than the traditional, maybe conservative, liberal. I think this concept of kindness actually really was instrumental in here. We talked a little bit about it with Jose being a self-described Bernie-crat, and here kind of Ronald Reagan, Republican, conservative, libertarian Republican, and we found ourselves working together extremely well and developing a very great friendship. And it wasn't forced, but we both looked at this idea of kindness. So let me go back a bit. So I mentioned I was on the city council from 1995 to 2004. And the last months when I was in office there, I had noticed that someone put these signs around town that said make kindness contagious. That's all it said. It didn't say buy something. It wasn't an ad. It just said make kindness contagious. And it struck me. And I had a chance to meet the gentleman who had put those up, and his name was Dr. Jayevsky, and he's from Argentina, and he's a holistic doctor. And he came to my office and he said, sat down and told me a story about his daughter, Natasha, who had tragically died. And he had found all these beautiful things that Natasha, as a little 6-year-old, had written about kindness. And the whole community had come out and talked about this little girl talking and being all about kindness. So then Dr. Jayevsky said, he says, you know, he says, in medicine, you can either treat the symptoms or you could holistically stimulate the body to heal from within. He said, that's what I do as a holistic doctor. And he says, I think the same principle applies to a city. You either treat the symptoms or you could stimulate the city to heal from within holistically. He says, I think that has something to do with kindness. And for me, that was the light bulb moment. It's like when you hear something, you know it's true. And I think it's probably because I had 10 years, let's come off 10 years on the city council, and I call it the whack-a-mole game of symptom treating. You know, we do work on one thing, something else comes up, work on another thing, that pops back up. And I really felt after 10 years, it really hadn't made any progress. And it was very frustrating. So this idea of kindness just pulled at me, actually, for 6 years. Thought, prayed a lot about it. And so when I decided to run, and the other side of that is freedom. And I've always been a freedom guy, I think probably from my father, but I see what how powerful that is too, and how many, and I also see at City Hall how many dreams are crushed because people want to start a business or do something, and they might have to go through City Hall, and you've got some, you know, silly, stupid regulations or whatever that crushes these dreams. So I ran on a platform of changing the core values in the city. So we have core value of kindness and freedom, but particularly kindness, that was something new. And kindness is defined as doing something for someone else with no expectation in return. So it's just the opposite of what's in it for me. And so if you could imagine an entire city of Anaheim. So here's the goal: the entire city of Anaheim. If you're walking down the street and you think, I'm from Anaheim, you think, well, we're a city of kindness. That's part of our ethos, kind of our civic duty. And I think the chance of that person doing a kind act is just a little bit greater, right? So now if you take that amongst 350,000 people, and I'm a business guy, so I think of things in graphs, charts, and you put a graph of, label things as either kind acts that happen in your city every day, millions of them, label them as either kind or not kind. Kind's here, not kind's up here. So now if you could change the core value, becomes part of our ethos, the culture, and we all know culture trumps strategy, policies, ordinances. It's way more important. It's how people think. If you could change the culture of city kinds, chance of doing something kind's a little bit greater. Kind acts goes up. Not kind acts, which we ignoring people, goes down. When that happens, as that happens, everything in your city gets better. Everything you could think of. Certainly things like bullying, the relationship between the police and the community, addiction, and all the problems that come from that. Addiction is so much a function of lack of kindness or isolation, lack of kindness. Communities are more resilient because people are getting out of their house and helping their neighbor. That creates resiliency in the neighborhood, helps community policing, helps for emergency response. So when a big earthquake comes, neighbors are going to know each other and help each other through acts of kindness. So it's a different way of thinking. Everything gets better. And with that, it creates relationships. And you see the other's humanity. So that's why I ran. It took a while. Michelle Montgomery, here's Michelle, I remember when we got elected, we said, okay, we ran on this, now what do? We had to come up with some policies. Had something simple as high neighbor. And it's basically saying, hey, if there's an emergency, don't rely on the fire department. For one, there's not enough of them. When there's that big earthquake, it's going to be neighbor helping neighbor. You better get to know one another. The way you get to know us through acts of kindness. So we started coming up with policies. Drug-free Anaheim. We came up with that one, which was if you're an addict in Anaheim, rather than getting kicked when you're down or maybe judged, you go to our police department. You go to our police department, and our police officers will get you into a program. That sends a entire different message to your police department and your city, to your community. And all of our policies came out like, what would a kind city do? And it actually, when Jose and I first met, I heard we talked about kindness, and Jose understood it with from his family and what happened early on in his family, and some acts of kindness that nobody gets where they are in life without the kind acts of others. Simple as that. So if you get a whole city like that, imagine what happens. And one thing else that happens is cronyism starts to go away because you start thinking about what's kind for that little 8-year-old kid on Anna Drive.
Well, thank you, Tom. And when you first mentioned this to John Lewis and I, this freedom and kindness, for the record, I was all for it. John Lewis was opposed to it because he didn't get to do hit pieces against your opponent. So, the kindness thing kind of rubs both ways. So, I did want to kind of come back a little bit to cronyism, kind of looking forward a little bit. And I wanted to start out with a brief quote that was posted on Facebook just this past weekend by one of my favorite Facebook friends, former Assemblyman Pat Nolan. And he posted this, and it's an excerpt from Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, written in 1957. Here it is. When you see that in order to produce, you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing. When you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods, but in favors. When you see that men get richer by graft and by poll than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed. I think that kind of summarizes what crony capitalism does to a community. It robs the community of its dignity. And I think it reinforces also in the public that the playing field is tilted to the insiders. So I wanted to ask you, Tom, what is an easy test for a local elected official, which we have many here, that they could apply that would let them know that they're falling into a crony capitalist trap? Because not all their friends are the wrong people to be associated with. Some of them are deserving. So how do they differentiate? What's an easy test that they could ask themselves?
I think I mentioned it earlier. Is this in the best interests of the people you represent, the community? And I tell you, when you have, and everyone in public office has people who contribute to their campaign. And when you vote against somebody, it's difficult. And I know Jose's done it, and Denise has done it, and I've done it. And it's difficult. And you have to, you just have to do it. You just have to do it. And I guess that's as simple as that. If you say if you come across an issue and you say I'm doing this because this is my supporter, or I want to run for office or higher office. I think actually in local office, people that go into local office with the goal of running for higher office, that's a tough road. And I don't know if that ever works, to tell you the truth. I don't know if that ever works, because you're always looking for who you're going to please and who you're going to tick off if you're doing that. I actually thought when I ran for mayor, I thought if I do a really good job, I probably won't get reelected. And if you kind of understand that going in, and you're going to get a lot of your friends that you thought were your friends are not going to be your friends, and you kind of understand that going in, you thought were your friends. Your friends are your friends, and they're often not political friends or friends that you come across when you're in elected office. So you have to be able to, you have to do that stuff. And a lot of people up here who are sitting with certainly do it.
Thank you for that. When you were mayor, you rarely had a majority. You were fortunate to serve with Denise and Jose and James Vanderbilt, who isn't here, who the four of you stood against crony capitalism as a majority for 2 years. But in the years that you were either on the wrong end on a 2 to 3 or a 1 to 4 council, what were some of the tools that you were able to utilize as mayor to push back on these deals, to bring in the community, bring in the media, or parliamentary procedure that stalled out some of the cronyism?
It helps be mayor, and I would say so if you don't have 3 votes in your mayor, you have no official power. So I didn't have, I mean, as some of you know, I mean, and Michelle certainly knows, I was often treated like I have no power because I didn't have any power, but I did have the power of the bully pulpit, and so that's a tremendous thing. It's not official, but as mayor, you get the mic, and the media wants to talk to you, and so you could shed light on this stuff, and that is the best disinfectant. You shed light on this stuff, and people scatter. And so that's it's not as easy when you're on the council. And in Anaheim, it's been the last since I left, it's been kind of extreme. I mean, they've maneuvered, as I mentioned earlier, 3 votes to put it on the agenda. Jose and Denise were saying as much as they possibly could, talking to the media every time they could, but they couldn't get a discussion on the city council agenda. And think you mentioned Voice of OC. Thank God for those guys. They were out there standing up against these big interests. So anyway, I know that was kind of the only voice that you're able to get to.
When you're the lone voice in the wilderness and there's law enforcement seems to be kind of not looking over anybody's shoulder and all these deals are going through, how frustrating is that when you know that, maybe there's you don't have the local law enforcement or a prosecutor that's looking into these deals. Finally, the FBI weighed in, but that was a long time into this. How frustrating was that?
Well, it's so Will kind of opened up talking about cronyism and then where you cross the line. So you don't really, I don't know if legal lines were crossed in this stuff. Haven't been privy to any of that stuff, but something's not right when these deals are happening all around you. When I was mayor, and again, that stadium deal in 2013, it shows up on the agenda right before Labor Day. When people normally aren't really paying attention, and like, how did that happen? How did the deal? I mean, how's a deal get negotiated where you really aren't part of any of that, where it's $1 a year? So it's very frustrating. But again, I actually, our friend Larry Arnn told me early on. He says, you know what, Ronald Reagan went straight to the people, and that's what I did. That was great advice I got from Dr. Arnn. So I just went straight to the people, and that stopped some of it.
So Larry Arnn, one of the great conservative thinkers in the United States, president at Hillsdale College, mentored you, helped you through this. Who else did you lean on for advice, and who else were you, looking to manage your way through these problems that you were facing?
You? No, John Lewis also. But I tell you, and Michelle Montgomery, I mentioned Michelle. Michelle took a ton of on one budget meeting. They cut the legs out from under, took her salary away. So for about 3 or 4 months a year of that year, I had no council assistant. But I would say, so I would come home after these council meetings, and Julie, my wife Julie, would watch them, and she was a source of great strength to me, because she calls herself my bodyguard, and she was. So, and we talk about this stuff. So it was really, I would say, more than anybody, my wife Julie. My parents certainly were, my friends were my friends, and Julie was with me every step of the way.
All right, I'm going to just ask two more questions here, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Many cities are chasing the huge project, the big shiny penny or the white whale, and they want to get the big stadium deal. They want the arena. They want the sales tax that comes from an auto dealership. They want these things, and they're really pushing hard on the city to do it, even though these deals really rarely work out well for the city, but they enrich the stadium, or they enrich the car dealership. Light rail, train stations in the city that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. What are the alternatives for a city to bring in income, revenue, without having to chase these bad deals?
Well, these bad deals don't bring any revenue. They just cost us. So it's like if Anaheim, my gosh, if Anaheim just did nothing and just didn't subsidize all this stuff, I think you'd drive into Anaheim and say, boy, everything's just a little nicer here. Because we talk about the debt to pay for these things. I mean, how can you pay one hotel here $300 million and not have it affect your services? So, what was it you just asked? So there's an alternative to this. For one, these corporate subsidies do not work. They just don't work. And you'll get all these studies from all these firms that'll say, I'll increase all this revenue. Kauffman Foundation, actually, I work with them a little bit these days. Kauffman Foundation out of Kansas City studies entrepreneurism and economies. I remember I went to a U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting. They said they did a big study. These things do not, corporate subsidies do not work. But what does work is entrepreneurism and small business. And if you have they said, if you have a city, the best predictor of economic growth, if you have a city with a high immigrant population, because those immigrants are going to start businesses. They tend to start businesses. So I thought, my gosh, that's what we have in Anaheim. How about we invest in our kids? We did a regulatory relief task force. We cut out a bunch of stupid regulations. Yeah, you might have heard of it. We started this thing called Brew City. That's just an example we could do when you get out of the way. And I like beer. You did great, I know. I think 20 breweries or something like that came out of that. And that was just really us getting out of the way and encouraging the small craftsperson entrepreneur. So I think, and then in the schools, Jose was talking about the schools. I'm really proud of our Anaheim schools. There's a big entrepreneur program there where youth entrepreneurs, and also we started something called AIM, Anaheim Integrative Mentoring Experience, where I, again, under the umbrella of kindness, went to businesses and said, hey, what these kids need is they need mentors. And they need, their parents might be working double shift in the changing beds in the hotel district. They have no idea what goes on in an office like this. All they need to be is shown that, and having a business person. And we have all these businesses, all these people come into Anaheim every day, all these great employees, and we have all these kids, and we just connect them. So that program's taken off. I think there's 90 businesses in Anaheim started from that, working with the Anaheim Union High School District. 90 businesses, internships, mentorship programs. So I think that's the long-term, actually short-term too. If you don't cut out all that crony stuff and focus on entrepreneurs and small businesses and helping your kids, give them confidence that they could be an entrepreneur too. I think it's kind of simple like that.
And then finally, is what was brought up a lot tonight is that corruption knows no party lines. Opposing corruption has no party lines. Both parties are susceptible to the crony capitalism, to corruption. And the solutions come from a bringing together of Democrats and Republicans, of conservatives and liberals. And I was really fortunate that for almost 2 years, I got to work with Denise Barnes at Anaheim City Hall as her council aide, and I got to work with both Tom and Jose on a regular basis. And they're two of the finest local representatives I've ever seen. And it mattered not to me whether Tom was a Republican or not, or Jose was a Democrat or not. They were both doing what was best for the city of Anaheim. And so I wanted to kind of ask both you guys, and I think it's a really important question. And Tom brought this up earlier today when I was talking to him. He said, if you have corruption at City Hall, the policy decisions don't matter. They're not relevant because you're fighting the corruption. You have the insider dealings. So you got to root out corruption. You got to root out the crony capitalism. So the question is, and I'll let Jose start, is how do you work together with somebody that has really a lot of opposing views to you on policy decisions, come together on the important issue of rooting out corruption and cronyism, and then battle it out again on the policy decisions, and still, you go home at the end of the day, you're shaking hands and you're, giving a hug goodnight, and you're moving on and you work with each other the next day. So this is a really important point for people, because we think that the other guy's the bad guy. As a Republican, I think it's always the Democrat that's corrupt, and Democrats think that it's only the Republicans that are corrupt. It's just a natural way of thinking about it. So how do we root out corruption, work together on that, and then oppose each other respectfully on the other stuff?
Wow. I think when we engaged on the district elections discussion, I remember asking Mayor Tait, one of the conversations happening is Anaheim, 2 out of 3 voters are Democrats. And every district will become a majority Democrat district. And he says, yeah, I know. I said, you okay with that? And he said, well, Republicans got to have better ideas for the neighborhoods then. So it becomes a marketplace of ideas and conversation. And so I think for me, the ability to walk away from policy differences, huge ones, is when you can believe that the person you're discussing and deliberating is coming from a place of honesty, and that they are truly trying to figure out what's best. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very clear in our council, it's very clear in other councils that I watch, the school boards as well, that again, the decisions are already cooked and baked, and let's just go in, let's just vote and let's get out of here. This is like a nuisance to have to do this in public. And so for me, I walked away, there were a number of policy issues that Mayor Tait and I would have discussions about and disagreements on, and Denise as well, and James as well. And but one thing we all agreed on is one, respect, and to base our discussions and differences on honesty. And I never felt that anyone that I've engaged with positively in good work was about me winning a policy idea. It's, I just learned something new myself. So let's think differently about that policy. I've not run a business, but I am an immigrant. And I know that 38% of small businesses in California are immigrant owned. Yet we only represent 26% of the state. So there's something about that. So, and I'll say this as an example. The year I was elected was the year that Donald Trump was elected. Different ideas about whether that was what that meant for the country. But what it meant in Anaheim is our central library. We had 34,000 patrons who would visit our library. It's largely immigrants. The following year, it was 26,000, right after his election. It was a fear that came through our city. And I approached Tom about that. I said, Tom, what do we do about this? A number of folks were pushing me to think about a sanctuary city, which I'm a big believer in. But I also thought as having been one to have to hide in the shadows, I'm not interested in simply, we're going to hide our immigrants from unjust laws or rhetoric. I think they should be part of our fabric. They are our fabric. And that's when we thrive. And so Tom said, let's figure that out through a task force. And so we did what's called a Welcoming Anaheim Task Force, and said we want to work with our immigrant communities to know that our police depend on them to work in our neighborhoods, our small businesses, our local economy depends on that. And let's treat each other with humanity and say that Anaheim's different, and we're not going to get involved in the rhetoric. And so that I felt was coming from an honest place. And I said, let's do that. And so I moved away from what we call it to what do we do? And so that's for me is how I feel that we work across differences. When you can believe that the discussion is more a deliberation with one another, a dialogue, rather than someone trying to win an argument or just get policies passed that they want no matter what.
Okay. I know when I was I was down on a 4-1 council, and these hotel subsidies would come up, or a 3-2 count down, 3-2, and Jose you'd have a room full of people arguing for these subsidies. And they're all organized, and you had the trade unions they packed the chambers, and you had people from Orange County Business Council and the Chamber of Commerce, and standing up and basically saying, basically saying, what kind of idiot would vote against this? And those were rough meetings. And I mentioned the small group that would constantly be there, and Jose would be there. And very, very articulate, state the reasons why you don't give a major corporation hundreds of millions of dollars. So I just liked that guy, right? Because he was a friend. And as the more I got to know him at the district elections, at first I was against district elections. I thought, it's more efficient. Everyone in the same, you don't get kind of ward politics, I thought. Everyone in the same boat. But what it was is if you want to run for city council, you go to the same people, the same money, and everybody's on the same team. And that doesn't make for good policy, because the city is very, very diverse. And you've got people from different backgrounds. And I learned a ton from Jose and what it's like growing up as an undocumented kid, and the potential, and things that I hadn't really thought about before. So for me, it's been it's been a joyful thing. Broadened my horizons. We disagree on a bunch of stuff, but I tell you, we agree on more stuff than we disagree on, which has been kind of a cool thing to find out. A lot more, and we all do. We all share this common humanity. And the virtues. I mean, Jose is very courageous. He's very honest. He's very kind. Who doesn't like that? So.
Well, I'm going to turn this back over to Will to close us up, but thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jose. Thank you again, Denise, and really a pleasure to work with all three of you at the City of Anaheim. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Will to close us up.
Thanks, Matt. Mary, would you go through the people we want to thank, and then I think we can adjourn for food and drinks now.
Good idea. All right. Well, again, want to thank Epoch Times. They're amazing. They gave us so much support. I think a lot of you are here tonight because you heard about that. I want to thank Voice of OC for everything they did to help promote the event and support us as well. It's amazing. I want to thank the folks of Kaya. They're amazing. Lindley's is sitting there. She's just here, just helping us, which is wonderful. Tim Surge missed his first thank you. He's here now, so thank you, Tim, because you really help us with all the logistics, and we're grateful that we're here tonight, and we know what a great part you had in that. So, of course, we want to thank our amazing panelists for taking the time out tonight to entertain us, teach us. It's been great. We love it, and just thank you to all of you for being here. We appreciate it.